All right, this is part two of chapter 23, the Georgia home front during World War II. What you're hearing are the Andrews sisters with Boogie Woogie Bugle Boy. In the military in Georgia was very, very important during World War II. The South had lots of military bases in it, including Georgia, for several reasons, and you're going to need to know these for the test. Um, there were large tracts of open, cheap land. Wages were lower, and there was a mild climate that allowed for year round training, which was something the Army needed. There were lots of important bases in Georgia. Fort McPherson in Atlanta was an Army base. You know about Fort Benning near Columbus. It was Army and infantry training. These are some World War II era barracks at Fort Benning. Warner Robins Army Warner Robins Army Air Depot was a World War II facility. Training and repair of B 17s, B 29s, and B 24s took place there. And Camp Stewart down near Savannah, near Hinesville, is a huge army base. There were also facilities that trained women. The U.S. Navy Training Center near Milledgeville was for WAVES, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service. They did things like roll parachutes, repair planes. I think they're rolling more parachutes. Um, Engine repair and air traffic control. All of those things were things that could be done by women, allowing men to actually be in combat. In class, we'll read about some of these women during World War II and some of the contributions they made to the war effort. The defense industry, in addition to the military, the defense industry was very important in Georgia. There were companies that manufactured military equipment. Probably most importantly were airplanes, the Bell Bomber Plant in Marietta. We had a Smart Start or a Today in Georgia History about it not too long ago. They manufactured over 600 B 29 Super Fortresses. These were huge, long range bombers that were used mostly in the Pacific. Tomorrow, we'll look at some video of these huge planes in the air. 37% of the workers at the Bell Bomber plant were women. Ships were also built in Georgia, in Savannah and in Brunswick. These were not military ships per se, they were used for transport. In Savannah, Southeast Shipbuilding built Liberty ships. These were cargo vessels, over 440 feet long, 56 feet wide. They could be built quickly and were used to transport military supplies. In addition, something called knot ships after 1945 were for short coastal transportation. Southeast Shipbuilding in Savannah produced 88 Liberty ships. The J.A. Jones Shipyard in Brunswick produced 85. These two shipyards employed over 45,000 each before the war was over. So when we were talking about the end of the Great Depression and it didn't really end until World War II, this is part of the reason. 45,000 jobs is just a huge number. So there was, if you wanted a job, there was one that you could have. Tomorrow or whenever, sometime in class, we'll take a look at the J.A. Jones website because they have some really cool pictures and they have a cool archive, and we'll take a look at some of those things. You've seen this poster before. This is sort of the iconic Rosie the Riveter poster, but it refers to the fact that during the war, women worked in the defense industries, freeing men to fight. Other positive effects of the war on Georgia were an improved economy, putting Georgians to work, and these were good jobs. Wages increased. Also, Georgians learned new skills that could be used after the war in industries. And it brought Georgians into contact with Americans from other parts of the country, which was something fairly new. Now, what was life at home in Georgia like during the war? This is where your essay question is coming from. Beginning in 1944, there was rationing, which means limiting the purchase of certain items. So lots of things were rationed. Rubber, because the military needed those, so you could only buy so many tires a year. Gasoline was rationed. This is a gasoline ration card for a doctor in somewhere in New York. Depending on what your job was, you might have more gasoline rationed for you. If your job involved travel, you would be allowed more gasoline. Food items were rationed, canned goods, meat, cheese, sugar. All of those things, what mattered most was supplying the military. By 1944, people were allowed 2 pairs of shoes a year because leather was needed for the military. In addition to rationing, Americans planted victory gardens to supplement their diet with fresh vegetables. Most people honored rationing, but the black market, in other words, the illegal sale of rationed goods, sprang up. We'll talk about how that worked in class. To supply the military with metals, rubber, and other scarce materials, scrap drives were held. And here are a couple of pictures from metal drives or scrap drives. My dad remembers separating the juicy fruit wrappers, that there was aluminum attached to the paper that wrapped up each piece of gum. He would separate the little tiny, tiny piece of thin sheet of aluminum and turn it in at a scrap drive. Americans bought war bonds to help pay for the war. By the time the war bond sales ended in 1946, 85 million Americans had purchased more than $185 billion worth of war bonds. Also, along the Georgia coast, there were blackouts to prevent U-boats attacking against shipping, which we had a Today in Georgia History about the fact that U-boats were prowling around there off the coast of Georgia. So those blackouts were necessary. We'll take a look at some of these posters um, trying to get people to buy war bonds. Take a look and decide which is your favorite and be prepared to discuss these in class tomorrow. Which is your favorite and why? And that's it for part 2.